And it really goes back to what nature's good at. And there's a thing called the microbial infallibility theory, which states, and it's been proven, that nature evolves to break things down.
Explain it to me like you're talking to your grandpa or your grandmother. So when you're talking about let nature take its course and it will eventually break down PFAS, explain it to grandpa. Are you saying you're basically an additive to...
That's him, not me.
Yeah. Explain it to the grandson. Well, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Stream podcast, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarni, a water strategy advisor and investor, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And of course, a big thanks to our ongoing partner and sponsor, Raymond James, and also our long-standing charity partner, Frank Water. So as part of this season on water and nature, we're pleased to welcome Nicole Richards, who is the CEO of Allonnia. So Nicole, welcome, and great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I am looking forward to the conversation and appreciate you having me on.
Very good. So, Nicole, we've got loads we want to talk to you about. We're going to kind of start with your origin story and kind of moving from the corporate world to the startup world. But I was saying earlier in the kind of the warm-up, how as a kind of communications, content, journalist guy, I was really admiring your tagline and your kind of how you mentioned around waste is a failure of the imagination, which I think is a really well-crafted way to talk about waste. But I think we can get into that a bit later on mining as well. And I think the reason we've brought you on is the kind of the angle on biology and kind of looking at one of your quotes before. You've mentioned biology can progress solutions to urgent challenges, which I love as well. So yeah, lots we want to dive into, but maybe we could start with, you had nearly 30 years starting as like a chemical engineer, working in the chemical businesses, then most recently working in M&A for a big, for the pond as well. And then an opportunity sort of came across your desk, right? So talk us about that day and kind of the thinking on kind of moving to what has now become Allonnia.
Yeah, great. And as you mentioned, working in big corporate environments and big chemical companies is something that I always loved throughout my career. I love the opportunities that I was given and really learning about manufacturing processes. It's something that's fascinating to me. And I had really incredible roles that I'm thankful for. When a call came 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, to join Allonnia as the CEO of a startup, it wasn't something on the surface that sounded interesting to me. I was in M&A at the time, as you mentioned, and I was acquiring startups. And I talked to a lot of CEOs of startups, and none of them looked like they were having fun. They were fundraising, haggard, and I'm like, no, thank you. I'm good. I love my job. But when I learned more about this new technology, and we're in the world of biology and synthetic biology, what really struck me is there are technologies that were being developed in other industries that hadn't been applied to some of these tough tech industrial applications. And as I learned more, I realized that what was being done in some of these big companies was great, but in comparison, incremental. And we have these big environmental challenges and sustainability challenges and value challenges in existing industry. And if you can apply a new technology that's never been used to that, to me, that was a way to make big change happen. And I thought, the last, whatever it is, third in my career, that's where I want to be. I want to make big change happen because we need it. And we have technologies that haven't been deployed that are making that possible. And that just got really exciting to me. And so I made the jump to Allonnia. And you mentioned our tagline, waste is a failure of imagination, which has really been the tagline since the inception of the idea of Allonnia. And that also struck me on a personal level. to me, it makes you think about what's possible and what is actually happening and why when you think about waste. So all of those things combined really are why I made the change. And it sounds corny, I know, but I love every day of what I do. I think no matter how many hours a day I'm working, I love it, and it actually surprises me.
Nicole, I will echo Tom's comment about the tagline. I think that is one of the most elegant and insightful taglines I've ever heard. So it sounds like you had this aha moment that the status quo was not really going to get it done at the speed that you believe we can make change, and a personal recognition that you wanted to move faster and try something different. So, I mean, was it like a buildup of, yeah, something has to change and I'm open to new ideas, or the light bulb moment where, oh, wow, I didn't know this. Let me dig in, and you got hooked. So, like, what was that
really
moment
was the
like?
light bulb moment. I really had not thought about how things could be different in a startup environment than they are in a big company environment. And so there was this light bulb moment that really originated with the technology opportunity and the tagline, and that got me excited. But then I started to reflect on what I was doing and how many hours a day were really being spent productive into making change happen. And it's the pro and the con of a big company, is that what I realized is when I really broke my day and week down, very little of my time was being spent in what I would consider a meaningful way to make change. A lot of it was communication and getting other people involved, and that's all important. But I just want to move, and I want to move fast, and I want to get things done. And you can do that in a startup. And I even see we're at 50 people now, and I can see how things can slow down. So we fight, and I do a lot, fight the urge to put in too many processes that slow things down, because I want every minute of my day to be spent in what I would consider making progress. And I want everyone that I'm working with here to feel the same way.
Nicole, I'm quite sure you speak to a lot of young professionals in our world, and continue to talk to startups. Is that a message, a key message that you pass on to them about being reflective and thinking about how you break out your week and what percentage is actually, I hate to say moving the ball, but moving the ball forward and feeling good like you've made progress?
I do. In fact, for our company, when people join, it's usually one of the first things I tell them is that I think it's really important for everyone to feel like they're bringing their skills and talents to work in a way that is meaningful for the work to be done. And if you feel like there's something getting in the way of that, we need to talk about it, and we need to find a way to overcome that. Because I just feel like good people want to make change happen. They want to use what their abilities are to get things done in a productive way. And when things start standing in the way of that, they lose motivation. And then that's not good for them, for the company, for anybody else around them. And sometimes you get to a point where your skills and talents and passions aren't the right fit. And then my perspective is, and it's true at the company I'm at, is that it's okay to leave then. And we part on good terms, and we say, we're going to help you get to where you want to go if it's Allonnia. And we'll get somebody else in, because we change. Like, we are very different 5 years from the start than we were in day one. And it's natural that people are going to evolve and move on. And that's perfectly okay.
I had a really interesting chat with the CEO of a quite disruptive startup. And he was mentioning that the team that you have when he started, like the first build it to about 10, 15 people, is a very different stage of the business when they went on to raise a Series B, chunky raise, and then they've kind of got 50, 60 more people. He said it's one of the hardest things to do because the people and the skill set you had at that early stage are perhaps not necessarily the people and the skill set you need for the next phase, and to kind of just step back as a CEO and actually, and like I say, have that conversation about whether they've people have reached their ceiling or whether and the company changes so quickly. So I think it's interesting that you made this leap of faith from the corporate world to the startup world. But was it, and this is what I always find interesting, was it a kind of a bit of a kind of alien environment? Because you went presumably from big corporations, there is a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of process, to essentially writing your own process. And probably, presumably, you went from a lot of time in the boardroom and meetings and schedules to actually, when you become the CEO of a startup, you're wearing so many hats and you're spinning so many plates that you just, your day must have changed quite differently. Can you maybe kind of reflect on that change when you started the new chapter?
Good or bad, my personality is such that I tend to jump into things and then I think about them a little later. And so I remember the first week I started, and the person that was kind of bringing me in to start this role, I'm like, okay, great. So where's the benefits that I sign up for? And they're like you have to come up with that. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I need to get some NDAs together to start talking to people. They're like, yeah, good. Go ahead and do that. I'm like, oh yeah, right. I don't have a legal department and I don't have a supply chain.
Right.
I don't have an HR department. That's me. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And then you're like, there, we've got a computer problem. Can I call IT? No, there is no IT department. We don't have a head of IT. Yeah.
I don't have a computer.
Right.
So it was, but throughout that all, you do realize that you are not only you're relying on yourself, that's fine, but then every person you bring in, you're responsible for making sure that they're not asking the questions that I was asking, because now I have to put that together. So it was a huge learning curve to get to that point.
How big do you think? Because I think you've obviously, how many staff do you have now?
About 50.
50. Okay, so you've grown quite a lot. How important do you think is for your role then during the early phase to where you are now, the kind of the ability of storytelling? Because when you're recruiting and you're building and you're recruiting the right talent, you have to tell them the story of what you're building and why you're building it and the purpose, right? So people always think about storytelling as like a communication and social media, but actually it transcends, because you're telling the story to investors, to your parent company of what you're doing. You're telling the story to people who you're recruiting. Was that kind of a big part of the role during that early phase?
It was and it is. And I would say, I don't know the percentage, probably 90% of the people that join Allonnia are joining because of the mission of what we're trying to do. So it's really, they're coming because they need a job and talents, but they really like Allonnia because of the mission. And so, as we got bigger, I realized that, maybe I don't need to interview everyone coming.
Of course, yeah.
But now I've reverted to I do. And there's two reasons for that. Because I want them to hear from me where we're going and what's important to me. And I also want to keep getting the communication across that you just talked about, Tom, which is that we are changing. Your job today is going to be different than your job in a year, probably. And you have to be okay with that. And because we aren't slowing down and we aren't going to wait. So you have to be okay with that change. And a lot of people aren't, and that's perfectly okay. But I need them to really understand that that is the world we live in. And then they ask me, lots of questions too. So I've kind of gone back to now I want to talk to everyone at the start.
So Nicole, what's your take on the ability of people coming in your door to recognize that it's going to be fluid, it's going to be agile? I mean, do some people say yes and then realize, oh no, I had no idea? Or are you finding that a higher percentage are, yeah, I'm good with this, and evolve over time? I mean, is there any additional insights on that one?
It's a good question, because there's one thing for people to hear that. And another thing because they're like, I mean, they're when they come to me, they've already interviewed with everyone. They know the job. They're excited about it. It's a mutual agreement at this point. I'm kind of at the end of the process. And so they want the job by the time they're talking to me, and we want them by that time too. And so I sometimes think they're hearing the words, but they're not
Right.
necessarily internalizing what it means. And time will tell, right? Like how this plays out in terms of, we don't have a lot of turnover. We have some, but the culture is still good. The motivation's high. I think we've won best place to work now, or great place to work. So I think we still have a good high morale in Allonnia.
That's good. And I think for any rapidly startup to scale up, a bit of headcount change is probably quite inevitable. I heard something recently which I love. That's the first 10 people you hire in terms of values, diversity of thought, will be indicative of the culture of the business when you have 100 people.
Mm. Mm.
It's quite good. So, right. So depending. So if you've hired 10, and I'm careful here not to be ageist, but it's very senior men in grey suits, and that's kind of who you're surrounding with, and that will shape the business to then when you have 100 people. But actually, if you've got a diversity of thought, of talent, of mindset, and you've got the value sorted when you've got 10 people, that will then kind of grow, and then it's like a spiral effect.
I think I agree with that from a culture perspective, but we have 5 generations in Allonnia, even though we only have 50 people. 5 generations, like from 20-year-old to 60-plus-year-olds. And so what I have noticed is we started hiring senior people to set the strategy and get started, set things up. And as we've progressed, we've really, added a lot of the younger generation. And it is, to me, added so much value and depth and diversity in the company that I'm really appreciative of. I think there's a different mindset. There's a different way to approach work. There's a different way to have conversations, which I love. Sometimes I joke, I feel like I'm getting therapy when I come to work, because there's so much insight into the different generations that, I'm like a sponge, like just learning it all. And I think it's been very valuable. So I think what you're saying is true, but I think that we have evolved, and we need to, based on, some of this diversity that we're hiring.
I love the 5 generations, because I'm at one end of that bracket, but that kind of diversity is invaluable, absolutely invaluable. I mean, that's my take.
It's hard though, because there's such a different mindset.
Yes,
I'll give you an embarrassing maybe example, but I'll use myself for this. So when I was in the lab, chemical engineer, and I was in the paper industry, and embarrassingly, I wouldn't do this today, but I'm like pipetting with my mouth, like at this point, right? Like
you survived.
I would of course, nobody does that anymore, but the amount of safety that is thought about in the lab today is night and day different than it was when I was in the lab. And so I have to kind of correct my mindset and be like, oh, is that all that happened? To oh, you're right, that is an issue. And I'm understanding why you think that's an issue. It might not be how I grew up, but actually you're right. We should make that change.
That's really interesting. I was at Vic Water last week in Australia, and I had the chance to sit with emerging leaders. And I got so much out of that 2-hour conversation than I'm confident they got from me. So I walked out of there like, wow, and one of the key things, and I sort of hawk this view of optimism. I felt optimistic. I felt energized. I felt, what is possible, which, is part of your tagline. And it's so critical to have those conversations and put yourself in an uncomfortable place and really, really listen.
Yeah.
I think with that 5 generation as well, it's really, and this is something that perhaps we missed during the pandemic, where everyone sort of switched to working from home, is the mixing of generations in the workplace. where knowledge transfer, there's almost this kind of osmosis of these spontaneous conversations and then meetings where you just remember from my early days working in London and publishing and sitting with a lot of senior editors, I was just absorbing so much just listening to people, right? But then I think in the pandemic, everyone rushed to home and we didn't have that mixing. So yeah, kudos, Nicole, for kind of bringing that quite diverse mix of generations at that early phase. We want to talk a little bit about, I think now, just funding and kind of investment and kind of how you see it as a CEO, because so if we go back, the company was launched from the Ginkgo Bioworks Ferment Consortium, right? With a 40 million Series A investment to kind of get things going, I believe. Is that right?
More, actually. Yeah. We launched at more like 55 million.
Launched with 55. Wow. Okay. So that's amazing. So go back in time to kind of that. Nice. And then, yeah, it's like, I see and report on some of the European PFAS companies that are sort of chasing the Series A. And then, there's check sizes of 3 to 5 million. So that's an incredible chunky Series A to start with. So yeah, can you go back in time to kind of that? And obviously that was part of the reason, for joining a startup as well, but it was well funded.
Yeah, I certainly did not appreciate how helpful that would be at the time. So at the time, a lot of that had been, as you had mentioned, put together before I even joined. And then I kind of finished up a little bit of the fundraising to bring it out to 55 million. But when I came in, the emphasis was, we've pulled together this incredible list of investors, General Atlantic and Viking Cascade, Battelle, like blue chip investors. And I didn't know how helpful that is, but upon reflection on that, when you're bringing this transformational technology, no matter what it is, into a market, it takes time. Nothing happens in a year or two, and so it takes time and money. And I think, right, one of the biggest things that happen to startups is they run out of money before they have time to get their solutions to market. Right. And so having the luxury of having that much funding early on gave us the opportunity to really, I would say, my investors would not want me to use this word, but play around a little bit with where the best fit for the technology would be, and this whole rubric that you create as a startup on where that fit is based on performance of technology, and then being able to narrow it down based on having proof points, testing things out, and then going all in on a market. Being able to do that has been incredible. And I think, as part of the journey of success that we're on, we couldn't have done it with the funding that you just said. We couldn't have done it with $3 to $5 million. We wouldn't have had the ability to bring very different technology to market with that.
It's such a valid point, isn't it? Because normally when companies are raising the much smaller check size, there is a runway of cash and time is running out. And there's kind of this, and there's part of it that's kind of that helps to sharpen the sword and be like, guys, we've got to make this work. So things are rushed sometimes. And I think, like you mentioned, actually, you had the kind of luxury position of being able to see actually where is the best fit. Let's get the validation of the technology, and then we actually decide this is where we want to go. So, it's an interesting story. So the link with Ginkgo Bioworks, that's the parent company that funded it through the fund, right? And that's then still kind of partly attached to the startup, or
So the kind of philosophy at that time was Ginkgo Bioworks is probably the best synthetic biology platform company out there with just like incredible capabilities to engineer biology. And their tagline is make biology easy to engineer, but they don't focus on the application. So what they realized is that they could try to do it all, or they could do what they're really good at, which is just engineering biology, and spin off companies to focus on the applications. And so they've, spun off a number of companies in that regard. And Allonnia was spun off to bring synthetic biology in to solve some of the world's toughest environmental problems. So it was spun off really with an idea and a technology platform. And so when I say play, it was really like, where does this biology have the most impact that can get to commercialization fastest and make the biggest changes? And so kind of like a lot of technology platforms, you have a lot of places that you can go, but being able to narrow it down and pick is really hard. And what I like about it is we were able to assess probably 12 different areas and say we can get them all now to a proof point and say now that's the one that's going to be fastest and most successful, versus saying we don't have enough information, so we're going to have to place a bet and hope that it was right. I think that's probably the biggest difference. And so Ginkgo is a shareholder in Allonnia. And we work very independently. We can work together. We don't have to work together. It's just where it makes the most sense.
No, Nicole, can you talk a little bit more about the selection process, like, the strategy journey, if you will? So, you had 12. Where did you land and why? And which avenues did you throw out, so to speak?
Yeah.
If you can just give us a little bit more insight, because it says a lot about how you think and how the company thinks about solving big problems.
Yeah. And I hope to go back to some of those ideas eventually when we're successful in the ones that we're in. But what we looked at is where's the hardest environmental problems that we have out there today, whether it be contaminants or whether it be greenhouse gas, that have unmet needs. There's not a solution that exists today that customers are willing to not only pay for the solution, they have the ability because of their profitability, but they're willing to pay for the development of the solution too. So skin in the game. And biology has a proof point that we believe there's enough in literature that has been done that says biology can solve that problem. So that was kind of the original that took us from like 100 ideas to 12. And then what we did was engage with customers, did some early R&D to say, how long is this going to take to get to market? And how much are we going to have to spend to get it to market? Because if you're engineering biology, like as a general rule in our industry, it's going to take 5 years and millions of dollars to get there. That's kind of where we were at that time. So where is fastest route to market, and how much will it take to invest, and do we have the capabilities? And then we narrowed it down to 2, which are in the mining sustainability area and in the emerging contaminant remediation area. So while those are 2 very different sounding areas, the commonality is they both require selective separations. And biology is really good at that because it can be very specific. And that's a little different than chemistry in the way that it works. And so that really helped narrow it down. And so our goal is to get those through commercialization, wildly successful, and then go back to some of those other ideas because they're still very valid and possible.
Interesting about selective separation as the common theme. Could you talk a little bit more about the mining sector? I mean, we talked about that, in our initial call, but I found that how you were framing the opportunity, it was really, really interesting and a big problem to solve.
Yeah, the thing about mining to me that is fascinating that the general public doesn't know, and hopefully they'll learn about it because I just think it's a fascinating industry, is that when we're mining, about 1% of what we're digging out of the ground is the metal we need. So if you think about that, like the tons of earth to get to 1% of copper, it's actually less than 1% of copper. It's like 0.8% of copper today. And so what happens today, it's a linear process. You dig it all out of the ground, you process it, you transport it, you smelt it in some cases, and then the 99+% goes into a waste pile. You've got tailings, water waste, and then you have just the rest of the ore waste. And when you go back to the origin of Allonnia, which is nature exists in a circular system, is like thinking about how do we take that as an inspiration and bring it to the industrial applications. Mining is a perfect example of that. That we don't have to do that. There's a ton of stuff in the earth that we can use that's already been dug up, that is considered waste, that has rare earth elements in it. It has a lot of metals in it that weren't the primary goal of extracting it. And so let's go back to all that waste and we've already dug it up. Let's reuse that. Let's clean up the water and take what's valuable out of there. And that comes back to that tagline, is that we can do that. We haven't really been able to do it because we haven't had technology to do it. But again, you go back to biology. Biology can be specific. You can design a protein that attaches to dysprosium or a rare earth element and can separate it. That hasn't really been possible before. So it really, to me, it gets exciting because you pair up like all the development and technology and biology that's been done with something that is a legacy system, and you marry those two together in a way that can make big change happen.
That's really cool. What's the receptivity by the mining sector to rethink waste as feedstock, essentially?
I talked last night. I talked to somebody that works for a mining company, and they don't consider themselves as being innovative. But I don't think that's true. We have talked to the biggest mining companies in the world. We have 2 that are investors in Allonnia. We're partnered with several others, and they want to change. They want to change. We have no problems getting meetings with these companies, which still blows my mind because I had a hard time getting meetings with these companies when I was in the big organizations. But the takeaway message to me is that they want something different. They know they have to change. They know they have problems in sustainability, even though today that's not a buying criteria. But they also know that ore grades are declining. They have huge infrastructure, and they, have shareholders that they're answering to. So something has to change, and it's going to have to be different. So they want new technology. So the desire is there. I think the challenge still is, like, how do you get from we really want to do this to we know how to do this well, in terms of bringing innovations into their mine site and piloting it and commercializing it? We're not there yet, but there is a desire to be innovative and to change.
Can you, I think it's quite a sobering number, isn't it? 99% of what's mined is essentially wasted, and then once it's treated, then it contains all the contaminants, and it's kind of not reused in a circular way. Can you talk maybe about the link with the kind of the electrification of vehicles, electric vehicles, and often the link with like lithium mining is kind of quickly pointed out. There's actually, there's this rush for electric vehicles, and kind of perhaps some of the past practices on lithium mining and extraction are not that sustainable. And so there's quite a lot of innovation now coming on the market with water treatment technologies and industrial companies pivoting to the lithium extraction and recovery side to be able to almost recalibrate water technology to then capture lithium in unconventional sources, such as geothermal waters, that type of thing. So to try and make mining of lithium and recovery more local. So it's interesting to maybe, do you have any thoughts on kind of the lithium part of mining?
Yeah, I think what the demand increase that we are seeing and expecting in these metals is requiring us to think very differently on where the source is of those metals.
Right.
So as you're mentioning, whether it's brine for lithium, or whether it's e-waste for REEs, or tailings waste for other metals, we have to think very differently. 2 to 5 times the amount of metals in some of these are going to be needed in the next 10 years. You can't just keep digging up more ground. Like, that's just not realistic. And by the way, like, we've dug up all of what they call the sweet ore. And so what you're digging up now is just lower quality ore. So that makes it even harder. So we have to get really creative, and we need to, about the sources of that. The other statistic that I find interesting, and this is a US one, but it's also true globally, is that more than 90% of the world's REEs are processed in China. And it's processed in China for various reasons, but one big reason is it's a very unsustainable process. And no other countries actually want to do that. And so you think of how reliant the world is on rare earths, which are critical to national security in a lot of different countries, and that has to change too. And I think this goes back to why the mining companies are willing to have new innovation, is because it's needed.
Perfect. Yeah, I think so if we maybe go back, because you mentioned you whittled down these kind of different markets to two. One was mining and one was contaminants of emerging concern. Do you think that the timing of that discovery phase also had something to do with it? Because obviously that's around the time when PFAS has become massive. There's an EPA regulation come in. There were like the big corporate fines to the multinational companies kind of going through the works, and so it's almost a perfect storm of policy, of kind of corporate fines, and then suddenly that triggered a lot of venture capital into startups facing PFAS. So that was all around the similar kind of 5-year period, right? Do you think those played a factor in putting a stake in the ground on PFAS as well?
100%. Yeah. And in my time before Allonnia, what I know to be true is like mining and for us, PFAS are two different drivers. And so one is on the asset side of the balance sheet and one is on the liability side. And you really want to be on the asset. Right. You want to be selling a solution that creates value that your customers can sell. That's ideal. If you have to be on the liability side, or if you choose to be on the liability side, you need regulations in place that are going to require that solution. They can't be coming, they can't be an investigation, they have to be there. It's just, I mean, you guys have seen it too, I'm sure. Just the can gets pushed down the road too often if those regulations aren't there. So the timing is critical. And because we were at the point where the states and countries were already putting these regulations in place, that helped. And the EPA had, in the US anyway, had noted that the regulations were going to be put in place. The timing was critical. And if this were happening 10 years ago, we wouldn't be in PFAS. It would just be too far away. As a startup, right. You can't afford that.
Absolutely, yeah. And so maybe, because we're sort of coming almost to the end, but it's an interesting perspective you sort of shared on PFAS in the sort of the warm-up call, but also because I think when I look at the PFAS solutions and where people see the innovation, it's quite sort of hard engineering, right? It's destruction, can be energy intensive, is actually to get rid of it by trying to break these so-called unbreakable carbon bonds. You know, they've been called forever chemicals, but actually talk us through how you see it from a kind of like nature and a like synthetic biology point of view. And actually it's kind of flipping the script a little bit on how you would treat PFAS, right?
It is. And it really goes back to what nature's good at. And there's a thing called the microbial infallibility theory, which states, and it's been proven, that nature evolves to break things down. It breaks them down to use in their metabolism. And so it's something that they need to survive. And so we've got lots of examples in bioremediation over time, where you've got organisms like Dihalococoides that breaks down chlorinated solvents. It does that naturally. And I was mentioning earlier, we started with breaking down 1,4-dioxane. Even though that one is not as regulated as PFAS, we found a natural organism that naturally breaks down 1,4-dioxane. That will happen with PFAS. Now, it takes nature a long time. And PFAS is a new chemical in the world of the environment. So it could take another, 100 years for nature to evolve to break that down, but eventually it will happen. It's happened with, everything else that we put in the ground that in similar ways. And so the interesting thing about synthetic biology is you can speed up time to have nature break that down faster. And so you can engineer biology so that it happens not in 100 years, but in 5 years. And if you think about the PFAS problem, we've heard it everywhere. It's everywhere in the world. It's in the Arctic and places that PFAS is not used or manufactured, is that doing an ex situ reaction is fine. We need to do that today, which means you're pulling it out of the ground, you're separating it, you're destroying it, and then you're using the water. But it's in every soil that we have. You can't do that with all your soil. So really the more elegant way to solve this is with nature. with the organisms that exist today or can exist in the future. And so I think the future of like cleaning up PFAS is using biology. It's going to take a while to get there. This is not easy science to do, but that's the way to have a sustainable long-term solution for really any of these emerging contaminants that exist today. And so it's an exciting time to be working in this space. Yeah, again, going back to this, you couldn't have done this 10 years ago. The tools didn't exist.
Right.
How does that work then? Just from a very explain it to me. I remember we had a podcast with someone, and she said when she speaks to startup, she's like, explain it to me like you're talking to your grandpa or your grandmother. So when you're talking about let nature take its course and it will eventually break down PFAS, explain it to grandpa. Are you saying you're basically an additive to?
That's him, not me.
Yeah. Explain it to the grandson. No. But what are you? How are you talking? So basically, if there's a field and soil, and essentially there's, like you mentioned, PFAS is everywhere. Are you putting an additive into that soil on that land to supercharge the natural recovery of that PFAS? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
So the way the technology works, there's a couple different ways that biology can work. One way is that they're excreting things like enzymes that are breaking down the contaminant so that they can consume it and use it as a food source. That's one way. They can also evolve to do that in inside their process. So they can also like think of it as PFAS as food. So they consume the PFAS. They've evolved to break that down to use it in their metabolism like we would any food source, and it breaks down into inert contaminants. So there's a couple ways that that organisms can work, but basically they're using it as part of their sustenance, and they're using what's around them. That's what they have. They want to survive, and so they're going to evolve, which I think is fascinating, so that they can use what's in their surrounding to survive.
Wow. So you'd basically train the microbes so they'd have a diet of PFAS.
Yep.
Did that work for you, Tom? Did you get it?
I think we've boiled it down. If there's any grandparents listening and they need a further explainer, we're happy to put in some notes. But no, I think I get it. Okay. Yeah. It's super interesting, isn't it? Because I think so much conversation when you look at innovation in PFAS is the engineering and the treatment and the high temperatures and that type of thing, which you certainly need. There's cases for destruction where there is water treatment, for example, and you need to get it out quickly. But this argument is like, if you can engineer a organism and actually help supercharge it with nature, it will take care of it. Okay.
Yeah. So going back to the beginning part of our conversation 5 years ago, when I heard about synthetic biology, I'm like, synthetic what? Like, what is that? And then you learn that this is happening and it's possible. And like, how can you not be part of that? Like, it's exciting.
Really cool. Okay. Well, I think we're sort of come to the end of the podcast. I don't know if there's any kind of closing thoughts from yourself, Will.
I find all of this not just fascinating, but optimistic. I mean, truly, optimistic, inspirational that, we can solve these problems in a very different way. And, when I started my career in sustainability, there was, the Biomimicry Institute, and that was a big deal. And it is refreshing to hear what you're doing because it fits elegantly into what they were all about, what they are about. And I think legitimately you could say this is disruptive. Everybody uses the word disruptive, and it's not true. This is true. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, it's really great because I think when we were mapping out the season and we're talking about kind of water and nature and some of the other guests, and we're like, okay, well, this PFAS in the environment is, quite a big topic, but actually linking with a company where it's synthetic biology and kind of the role of nature. It's a super interesting conversation. So thanks so much, and congrats on making the leap from the corporate to the startup world. I'm sure, as we said before, you've now probably got the bug, and now going back to the corporate world will quite difficult, I'm sure. And you'll sort of become a serial entrepreneur, and there'll be other chapters in your life. But yeah, congrats on making the leap successful and for scaling the business to 50 people and the next stages as well. Yeah, I'm super excited to kind of follow the journey and where it's going.
Thank you. It was great to have the conversation with you both. A lot of fun, and I appreciate the questions and the interest.
Thanks, Nicole.
All right. Take care.
Bye.